Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Let's get into our first news story of today, and this one was one when it caught my eye. It quite amused me, I must say. The headline is, "The South African Communist Party is unfazed by the decision to ban it from ANC election strategy meetings." Now, this is in the wake of the SACP earlier this year saying that it was going to contest elections in the next local government elections, I presume against the ANC, because it felt like it needed to make its voice heard in the electoral landscape, and that the ANC wasn't properly giving it its due inside the alliance. Now, the SACP has promised this many, many times in many elections, but then have barely ever gone through with it. I think they've only stood in one municipality before. But generally speaking, it looks like they are a little bit more serious about it this time. And they were apparently thrown out of one of these discussion meetings in Mpumalanga when ANC Deputy Secretary General Nomvula Mokonyane said that she had chased away SACP members from the party's electoral meeting in Mpumalanga, saying, quote, "The ANC will not be Zoomified, where you sit with people who are going to contest and target the same constituency as you, planning with you on how to make sure your candidate is the best candidate. There is nothing untoward, and we will continue doing it." The SACP says the fact that the ANC is unwilling to have our comrades in their meetings where they are discussing their election strategy is not abnormal. The only thing unusual is that those comrades went through the invitation of the ANC and the ANC made a mistake to invite them, was the response from the SACP. Apparently, the National Working Committee of the ANC has told the media sort of off the record that the ANC had warned the SACP that it could suffer the same fate as Jacob Zuma should it choose to contest the next local government elections. Terence, this has been bubbling away now for a few months. Do you think that they're serious? And secondly, what do you make of this little episode here?
Well, I think for the SACP, this seems to be a case of something to do with cake and eating it. Although they don't believe in having things, so maybe you can't really use that. But you get the point. If they have made a decision to stand independently, then they are by implication standing against the ANC, unless there is some sort of agreement that they'll split lists or something. But the SACP has done remarkably well out of a democracy in which it has, as you said, I think only on one occasion ever put its name on a ballot. So yeah, I think that that if it is demanding a particular policy course, then it needs to man up, person up, whatever the appropriate phrase is, and and put its offering forward. I don't believe it actually it will have much traction, but geez, there's a certain chutzpah to showing up at the strategy meeting of a party that you're going to be opposing. I mean, why doesn't the DA just do that? The DA might arrive on time if you believe the account in Tony Leon's book. The other thing, of course, is that this I think has not been coming for a few months. It's been coming since the dawn of democracy. I think it also says something else, that with the ANC not being the undisputed hegemon, its skirts are probably no longer seen as that indispensable to hide behind. I don't know. We shall see.
Yeah, I still do struggle to truly understand why it is that the ANC gives so many privileges to the SACP. There was a time, obviously, in the past when the SACP was the link between the sort of Soviet funding of the ANC and the ANC. There was a time after that when it provided this sort of these more intellectual members and ministers and cabinet people and commentators who kind of backed up the ANC. But increasingly, it just seems more and more like a parasite feeding off of the ANC. So I don't know why they continue to treat it with such reverence within the alliance.
I think it comes down to this mystique that it is the intellectual heartbeat, and I do remember actually speaking to to an ANC legislator at one point, it's probably about 15 years ago, and he said, how could I choose between the ANC and the SACP? They are one, and I'm equally committed to both. I think that could well be the most difficult choice. People who haven't had to make any kind of hard choices, but when it becomes a case maybe of whose trough do you want to eat at? That becomes a difficult one. I think also he has viewed itself as a sort of keeper of transcendental truths, and therefore, has not only a right but a duty to remain, in sort of backroom control of the ANC.
Yes, no, I think that's exactly it. But it is rather strange because, as you say, that the SACP is constantly trying to have its cake and eat it too, and that if it is truly inseparable from the ANC, then why does it continue to exist? Just to be absorbed into it. Or if you are separate, then why do you expect privileges when you oppose the organization from within? Sure. Anyway,
absolutely.
Let's move on to our next one. We're starting to see the first sort of, shots fired, for want of a better metaphor, in Parliament over the DA's coming attack on the ANC, and I think what is basically an attempt to maybe get kicked out of the GNU. The DA had promised that in Parliament it would vote against departmental budgets of what it identified as corrupt ministers. And it began this with the Minister of Higher Education, Minister Nkabane, who is having her departmental budget opposed by the DA, as well as the EFF and MK. The DA's member in the Council of National Council of Provinces, I think this was, said, it's time for President Ramaphosa to fire Minister Nkabane and clean up the ANC's criminal network at the heart of Parliament. Another failure in this minister's dossier. It's a recent scandal involving the appointment of an ANC-connected individuals to the sector, to CETA. The minister brazenly appointed comrades to these crucial roles and acted like they were in employment intending to serve political interests rather than the public good. At the same time, there is reporting that the ANC's National Working Committee says that it is not going to punish the DA for these moves. And in fact, the ANC has also said that it's not going to vote against DA ministers' departmental budgets. Quite interesting. Terence, what do you make of all this?
I think that this is part of the painful and confusing process of learning to cooperate, whose success, I hasten to add, is far from assured. But I do think that the ANC finds itself on what is termed a long slapperim, which means in a precarious position, because yes, they can defend these ministers, but I think there's a lot of tide of elite and popular opinion against this. I mean, we all get very upset about corruption. So you can't, and I think, this is just picture perfect, bang, in front of Parliament, lying, bang, bang, bang. It's not a good look. I think also the ANC probably has had to rethink its strategy to some extent, and it has to try and appeal to people beyond its immediate leadership or representatives, to show that they are the sober and judicious people in the room. Yes, the Andrew Whitfield was all about sort of breakdown of discipline. The GNU remains very popular, and I don't think either party wants to be the ones who break it. I think that right. will come with censure. Right now, I think it's a jockeying game for people's hearts and minds.
Exactly, and so against that backdrop, I think both sides are essentially trying to get the other one to kick them out in some way. The DA wants to be thrown out of its ministerial positions by Ramaphosa being furiously denounced, and the ANC wants the DA to walk off in a huff. And as long as the stalemate continues, I think government is only going to be more and more turned against itself, which is going to be quite a sight to behold. Okay, let us move on to our final story for today. And this is a comment made in Parliament by Correctional Services Minister from the Freedom Front Plus, Peter Groenewald, who suggested that a potential solution to the large number of people awaiting trial in jails but aren't able to afford bail, that a solution to this problem could be the reimposition of corporal punishment, and sort of physically punishing people. He said that there are 104,000 inmates in correctional services facilities and they have limited beds. He said about 60,000 remand detainees are awaiting trial. 60,000 people who are in jail because they cannot afford the bail. With about 2,500 of those unable to afford bail amounts of R1,000 or less. That is a very grim statistic. Minister Groenewald said, if you look at our criminal justice system, we must start a debate to say, shouldn't we bring back corporal punishment? A young person who steals 10 loaves of bread, sits in prison and waits about 3 years for sentencing. Think about whether we should bring back corporal punishment. It was pushed back to this from various parties. But, Terence, I don't agree with this idea, but I'm very sympathetic to what it's trying to solve here. It's a very real problem that we have so many people sitting in our jails who have not yet faced trial, not been found guilty of anything, and some cases just because they're poor, basically.
Yeah.
And yet, I don't think corporal punishment will work, partly because, the societies which used to use corporal punishment, I mean, it was very common in the sort of pre-modern world. It was effective because people lived in very closely tight-knit communities, and corporal punishment was very humiliating, and it carried a powerful social sanction on top of the sort of actual physical hurt that it caused. I don't think in the modern world that is that all the case. I don't think it would be particularly effective. Also, I'd be curious to know how many people actually have such tiny offenses that people would consider corporal punishment as effectively a justifiable punishment. That being said, I mean, presumably you still have to go to trial to be found guilty of corporal punishment. The courts are not working particularly fast. But Terence, I'd just like your thoughts on this idea. I mean, how do we solve this problem if not through Minister Groenewald's solution?
Look, I can speak about this with some degree of detached authority, because when I was growing up, that was still a sentence that you go to the magistrate's court, usually for kind of delinquent offences, and you'd be sentenced to a couple of cuts, which would be administered by a police officer. I know it's not actually entirely extinct. So there was a big diplomatic rort in Singapore in the 90s where an American teenager spray painted some cars, and he was sentenced to cuts from a martial arts master with a rattan cane. I imagine the next time he goes and spray paints a car, it's not going to be in Singapore. Now, I think constitutionally this just wouldn't fly. So I think there's just no way. But this is a very real issue, that if someone is sitting in prison for 3 years to be sentenced for stealing a loaf of bread, at the end of those 3 years, do you sentence him to be caned? That the problem remains is non-functioning courts. I'm at a loss. I really don't know. There are suggestions for sort of community supervision and that sort of thing. This all that sort of defund the police type stuff, which maybe would work for non-violent crimes of necessity. But I personally think that South Africa's entire crime problem it comes down to this. And I think it was Anthony Oltbierker who explained it in his assessment. It's like you go to a party when you're an awkward teenager and no one's dancing. Then one person goes onto the dance floor and starts to groove. And then people feel more and more comfortable. We've just got to a point where everyone's on the crime dance floor. Whether that's a case of speeding, driving drunk, or, like going and shooting someone. I have no idea how you how you deal with it. And this is, look, this is something that you hear from people from elsewhere in Africa. It's not like they don't have the corrupt governments, they don't have the like the dysfunctional police forces, the poverty, whatever. What they don't have is a cloying sense of fear, and I think that's because you have stronger social bonds that hold people together. I've heard this from a guy from the DRC. He says, yeah, like people there live with no prospects of what is available in South Africa, but you don't have a lock on your door because people aren't going to break in and rough you up and steal your stuff. It's just
I've heard. I apologies if I'm misremembering the story, but I remember when my mother went to do some work in Ghana. A lot of the local Ghanaians were sort of very perplexed by how anyone can live in South Africa because it's such a violent and crime-ridden place. And Ghana is a society that's quite a lot poorer than ours. It's been doing better in recent years, but exactly this. Although I do feel like this issue really highlights how our courts are not working fast enough.
Sure, yeah.
And their capacity massively needs to be increased because you cannot have a situation where people who have not yet been found guilty of anything are sitting in jail for years and years.
Look, I wonder if it wouldn't be possible to sort of, get very minor crimes, pushed through in some sort of, small crimes court sort of, 24-hour shifts. You go testimony and there's some sort of restitutionary sentence. You get to go and weed the church garden or something like that. But there again, that also takes organization.
I think Makashula Ghana from the Rise Mzansi basically suggested something like that in response to this issue.
I do know someone who was sentenced to something like that back in the 90s. He had to go to a police station. They swept all the dirt to one side of the courtyard, swept it all the way to the other side. That was community service.
Yeah, no, I feel like one could use people's time better, even if they are being punished. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for watching. We hope you found the show interesting, and we'll be back tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.
The Daily Friend Show and the Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR, or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.